Right. So in the last class, we studied about liberalism and socialism. Okay. So now, out of those ideologies we have, I told you all that liberalism, socialism, and the third most important ideology is fascism, because this is also another exclusive ideology that can be followed by countries. Now that we've studied what socialism and liberalism is, if you think about those circles that we drew in our basics class, liberalism is about the individual, making sure that each individual is happy, right? Each individual has the most satisfying life that they can have. Secondly, that we saw socialism is about establishing the best possible life for everyone instead of like individual. Thirdly, we have fascism, the third circle, where you drew either a national flag or a country, or drew like a small house and wrote this and named the state on it. That means fascism is about making the state supreme, right? As an ideology, fascism focuses on assuring that every state is in the best shape possible. Okay. Right. So comparing to liberalism and socialism, which has a couple of centuries of history, fascism has a shorter history because it was created in the early 20th century during the World War times. Okay. So although it talks about making the state superior and all that, basically fascism is the idea of an autocratic dictatorship rule, right? Having one person controlling everything. Now, keep in mind, now we learned this in Unit 4 also. Fascism is a dictatorship, yes, but not every dictatorship is fascist. Okay, it's like saying that all Sri Lankans are humans, but not all humans are Sri Lankans, right? Like that, every fascist government is a dictatorship, but not every dictatorship is a fascist government. Like that. So fascism is not exactly a synonym for a dictatorship, okay, but it supports the idea of a dictatorship. Rather than a dictatorship, fascism has its own unique features. Now, who is the father of fascism? Benito Mussolini. A lot of people think it's Hitler, but not exactly. Mussolini was the one who created this as an ideology. Okay, so similar to Mussolini's ideology in Italy, Hitler in Germany, and also Emperor Hirohito in Japan also had a similar ideology going on. Okay, so these are the two best buddies in Europe who had the fascist rule going on, right? Although Hitler is mostly well known because Hitler had a more of an effective way of implying that. Well, Mussolini, of course, he's not that, he doesn't have that much of a political personality. He's the one who created fascism as a theory, as an ideology, which is why that we study about him, because we study the political aspect as political science students. So let's see what is the background behind the concept of fascism. How did fascism come into existence? Now, first of all, this Mussolini and his friends, his followers, founded this organization in 1915. The name was Fascio, and he wanted to promote fascism, right? So this organization ran for parliamentary elections in Italy, but like couldn't win any seats because they were considered as like a bunch of a little, bunch of nutcases who talks about a dictatorship and all that. No one really voted for them. But however, when the First World War came, the liberal government they had, it started losing its popularity. So of course, you all know after a war, it is a tough time, right? So especially after the World War, Italy suffered a lot from those post-war economic struggles. And the liberal government started losing their popularity quite vastly. Now you see what's happening with the Sri Lankan government under the COVID situation, because a tough situation, government is struggling financially and keeping the health protocols going, everything, the government is struggling big time, and you can see how the government is losing its popularity really fast. And in Italy also, the liberal government was losing its popularity quite a lot. So in other countries, when liberal governments are losing popularity, who came and got the power? It was the communists or the socialists who came and got the power when liberalism failed. Except in Italy. Except in Italy, where in Italy, the fascists came and got the power. Fascist means that who this person, Mussolini and his friends, actually came and got the power. Right? Now, which we remember that we studied this under civil society also. We saw that Mr. Antonio Gramsci, the Italian political scientist, Gramsci also did research on like why the socialists and the communists failed to capture power in Italy when the liberal government lost its popularity. Okay. And that's when he created the whole Neo-Marxist interpretation on civil society. We remember we studied that in Unit 2. Okay. However, the point that is relevant here is that fascists came and took over. When liberalism failed, in other countries when liberals failed, the socialists came and took over. But in Italy, when the liberals failed, the fascists came and took over. Okay. Well, even people sort of liked fascism, like even in 1915, when he was running in elections, people are like, okay, who is this crazy person, right? But in by after First World War and all that, since fascism promoted a united, independent, strong Italy, even the Italian public was like, okay, you know what, fascism doesn't sound that bad. Let's give it a go. Okay, so they started getting political dominance, and by like late 1920s, Italian political system was dominated by Mussolini. Then, of course, in 1930s, one of a similar person, one of another leader came in, one of the other European countries, which was Mr. Adolf Hitler. He came in Germany, and this person had very similar ideologies, and he was more powerful. He was more powerful than Mussolini. And he started following the fascist theory. But given that there are some differences here and there, Hitler's theory is known as Nazism, because Nazi is the word that he used in German to refer to his political party, right? Nazi. So he started the Nazi Germany, and Nazi Germany is the best example for fascism, how Germany looked like under Hitler's rule. Okay. So unlike in the Italian parliament, where Mussolini sort of struggled to gain power, in the German parliament, however, Hitler managed to get a very reasonable power. So much so, by the time that German President Hindenburg died in 1934, right? Hitler was there as the vice chancellor. And chancellor, okay? He was there as a chancellor, and he took control of all the positions, and he took control of the entire Germany, and he became the supreme leader of Germany. And of course, I believe that you all are aware of what happened after that. Okay. So following Italy and Germany, there are several other countries who followed a certain fascist rule. Okay. So not every fascist rule is similar, but there are some common similarities between fascist rules. So what is the closest to a fascist rule we have in the current world? Does anyone know? Modern day example, anyone?
North Korea.
Yes, North Korea.
North Korea.
Yes, North Korea is a good example. North Korea is the closest example we have at the moment when we talk about fascist countries. Okay. So if we talk about fascism as an ideology, okay. Now, first thing you need to understand is that these three are considered as the three mainstream and important ideologies. Why? Because these three ideologies are exclusive. Like a country can't be liberal and socialist and fascist at the same time. We have to pick here, pick one. Okay. So it's like being liberal or socialist or fascist is like being Sinhala, Tamil or Muslim. Like you belong to one of those, right? And other ones like republicanism, secularism, it's like what your policies, like being vegetarian or like, being non-alcoholic or things like that. You get to choose whether to be that or not, right? Like being religious, right? Being conservative, being liberal, like, those things that you get liberal in like the way you think, okay? So that you get to choose. Okay, so for countries, these three are considered as the mainstream and important ideologies because these three are exclusive from one another. Depends on what you prioritize. Do you prioritize individual autonomy? Do you prioritize like groups, like groups in the sense like everyone in the society, betterment of everyone, the fairness, or is it like the supremacy of the state? Okay, depends on that. But however, comparing to liberalism and socialism, fascism lacks a proper ideological structure. Because if you remember, liberalism talks about how state came into existence. And they talk about the social contract theory and all that. Then socialism, in Karl Marx's scientific socialist idea, in communist idea, it talks about how the 6 eras and how state came into existence in the second era and all that. Comparing to that, this fascism hardly has any explanation as to how state came into existence, why state is so powerful. Nothing is mentioned. It's pretty much just saying like, state is supreme, leader is supreme, you people mean nothing, and like be ready to go to war, and you don't get any rights. Simple as that. It's not like a properly organized or properly developed ideology, right? The basic idea that the individual betterment and the betterment of everyone should be compromised to assure the betterment of the state. Simple as that, right? Then we have a couple of main features. Okay, first of all, totalitarianism. What do you mean by totalitarianism? Totalitarianism. Now, this is like totalitarianism is a little similar to the word dictatorship, but I think I explained this when I was teaching you all Unit 4. Totalitarianism is like when you have the dominance of a group. Dictatorship is when you have the group of a solitary leader. Totalitarianism is like when you have the dominance of a group. Okay, but it's very difficult to draw a line because Hitler was never a single person, right? Hitler had his supporters. So, however, totalitarianism means that the political power is centralized with the ruler and his supporters, right, and his people. Then the cult of the state, like fascist countries aren't religious. Okay, you don't give prominence to God, you give prominence to the state, you give prominence to your leader and all that. And cult of the state and the cult of the leader, right? State is worshipped just like that, the leader is also worshipped. Now, in fascist countries, their leader is sort of considered as a divine figure. Okay, so back in the day, like in Nazi Germany, right? They use the word, they never use Hitler, they use Führer. The German word Führer. Führer means the supreme leader. Okay, Führer, or they used things like they use the word Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler means Hail Hitler. Instead of like they didn't use normal greeting words. They didn't use like good morning, good evening, bye, whatever. They never said any of that. They said Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. Every time they meet each other, like Heil Hitler. Okay, and they even used all Hitler's pictures in all those textbooks in German schools. They had Hitler's photo on it. Okay, then they also had those quotes about Hitler. Like they had separately appointed a minister called what was his name? Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the minister of propaganda. He's the one who handled all this. So he was advised to add quotes like Hitler is like a star above us. our great leader Hitler, we love you, and all those things were mentioned in school textbooks, like, to sort of like brainwash the students from a younger age to believe like, Hitler is a leader and all that. Okay, so maybe you guys don't remember, but around like 2007, 8, 9, during that time when Mahinda Rajapaksa was winning the war and he was like extremely powerful as a leader, whereas UNP, JVP, all the political parties were like very weak. It didn't look like, although Mahinda Rajapaksa lost in 2015, it didn't really look like he was going to lose anytime soon. At that time, it looked like, okay, Sri Lanka is stuck with like a kind of like a fascist leader, because even he had all those songs written about him. Jatika Rupani and ITN used to, put those stuff. Like back in the day, social media wasn't that common, right? So people were watching TV very much. And all these private channels, Sirius, Swarnaini, Derano, whatever, those channels weren't really clear to other areas. And the entire area of the Sri Lanka, they normally watch Rupawahini and ITN, and those two channels that they used to praise president all the time. And wherever you go, like from place to place, like from like 10 meters to 10 meters, you are seeing like cutouts of like Mahinda holding babies, Mahinda shaking hands of foreign leaders, Mahinda with the army, right? And all that. So at that time, it sort of looked like Sri Lanka was also developing a cult of the leader. And I was in the A-level class. I was in grade 12 in 2009. And I remember me having a chat with my friend saying, okay, you know what, like Mahinda is turning into a fascist leader now. Perhaps instead of saying good morning, we should say like Mahinda Jai, like Heil Mahinda, like in our language. I remember having a chat like that. So that's how it works. Even in North Korea, as you guys mentioned, in North Korea, that the TV channels should have a TV program of showing the daily routine of the president. They are leaders, Kim Jong Un, and the textbooks also have like a separate subject to teach about the leader, and that syllabus has that he started to speak when he was 3 months old, and by the time he was 9 months old he could walk, and by the time he was 3 he could speak 6 languages, and by the time of he was like 6 years old he directed an entire opera, and it is known as the world's best opera and all that, like to show that he's different than normal humans. He's sort of a divine figure. So these things, they sound really, what do you call it? They sound really ridiculous to us, but in fascist countries, that's how they do. Even I read an article recently from on CNN that a mother in North Korea was executed because when her house was on fire, she had saved her 3 children, and she hadn't saved the portrait of the supreme leader, right? Every house in North Korea should have one of those portraits, oil paintings of their leader. And apparently, when the house was on fire, she hasn't taken that out because she was focused on taking her 3 children out of the burning house, and she was executed for that, right? So they're taking it pretty serious how they treat the leader. All right. So because of that, we see that there's something called the cult of the leader in these countries. Then obviously they have extreme racism going on. They believe that their race is the superior race, right? The Aryan, pure Aryan race. They don't want the races to be mixed, right? And they believe that the Jewish ethnicity to be like a bad thing for Europe, which is why that Hitler had executed nearly like 6 million Jews, right? 6 million Jews. That's around like 1/4 of the Sri Lankan population, right? So around 6 million Jewish people died in concentration camps, and they believe that it's like getting rid of something that is bad. That's what they mention. Right. So Hitler clearly says that there are 3 races. There's the Aryan race, the pure race, who should have the dominance, and then you have the slave race, the ones who should be slaves. The other colors like the black people, brown people, Latinos, and all that. And then they believe the Jewish people are like the ones that should be executed. So they believe in that. They believe their race is supreme. Right. Then they have extreme militarism. Right. They work a lot with the military. Right. So they normally go to war. So much so that they don't even believe in uh, friendly diplomacy. When they work with other countries, what they do is they often go to war. One second, guys, I'm receiving. So because of that, we see that fascist countries, fascist governments normally prefer the policy of like blood and iron. That's what they call it, blood and iron, right? They follow an invasive foreign policy. When they work with other countries, they don't go with friendly diplomacy. They invade the country. That's what they do, right? And they believe that peace is a dream of cowards, right? And they believe that blood and iron is a proper policy to go to. And they believe that people inherit war, similar to women inherit motherhood. Okay. And of course, they believe that the Germans should invade other countries and create a German empire. Okay. Then, of course, they use violence and terror as a political weapon, right? It's not something that they hide. They simply say that, you know, you can't make other parties. You can't make new parties. It normally functions with a one-party system, right? We saw this in Unit 3 also when we studied about fascist state. So they directly say that if you make another party, that you will get executed. That's something that's an offense for you to get executed, making another political party or not having the same opinion as your government. So they use violence and terror as a political weapon, and they force you to endorse them. Okay. And they believe that the state protection works. Now, for example, the Jewish execution, right? The Jewish people being executed, that was done by the government, right? It's not like unofficially a bunch of people come and, you know, shoot you down. It's like the government officials coming with like those government records, like they have records of residents of each area, right? So they come with that list and they check which families are Jewish, and like the government officials coming in government vehicles, right? And for each house, they'll be like, okay, your family is Jewish, it seems, please get on the truck. And the minister sends a letter saying, with the official ministry letterhead saying, okay, execute these people. So everything was done using governmental actions. Okay, it's not like unofficial them coming and white pants coming and taking these people going, and the government is like, you know, we are protecting these people, we have no idea. No, the government is like, no, we are using the governmental power, right? Like, you know, the Gram Niladhari and stuff, right? So whoever the officer, like the Gram Niladhari in that area, he has a list of people and he gets an order saying, like, you know, mention all the Jewish families in your area. And it was the government running this. Officially, the government was running violence to get rid of the Jewish people. So that's how it works in a fascist country. And obviously, the lack of liberty and rights, you don't get rights, you don't get liberty. They clearly reject the rights and liberty and say that in order to have a proper great state, you can't be given rights. And they clearly say that. They clearly say that you don't have rights, you don't have liberty, and they believe in inequality. They say that you know, men are superior to women, soldiers are superior to men, officers are superior to soldiers, and the leader is superior to officers. So they believe in an unequal system, exact opposite of socialism and liberalism. Now, as we discussed before, the Neo-Marxists including Mr. Antonio Gramsci and other Neo-Marxists, especially Mr. Herbert Marcuse, right? There's a picture of Mr. Herbert Marcuse. They had a different take on fascism. As we saw that liberalism failed and then came fascism, the neo-Marxists identify fascism as liberalism in decay, right? Liberal capitalism in decay, right? That says that this should be capitalism to be more accurate. Capitalism in decay, right? So basically what they say is that when the liberal capitalism fails to maintain the capitalistic system, they apply fascism. Now, what does the Marxists say? How do they define the liberal system? That means that liberal system says the state tells you that you have all your rights, right? Liberal state tells you have your rights, you have equality, you have your liberty, you are allowed to do whatever. You have the liberty to do this, you have the liberty to do that. But in reality, what happens is you just have to work and work and work, whereas the rich people are taking all the profits away from you, right? So when that doesn't work, then the state turns fascist and be like, okay, you all don't have rights, you all don't have liberty, you all better work because the state is supreme to you, right? It's like, imagine this class, imagine me being a liberal leader. That means I will be like, okay, imagine a system that I get you all to work. I get you all to work and I make money out of it, right? Imagine I get you all to prepare papers or whatever, and I sell them outside and I'm making profit. So what I'm going to tell you all is, you guys have rights. You guys have rights in this class. You all can do whatever you want as long as it's not illegal. You have your rights. My priority is making sure each and every citizen, so each and every person in this class is going to be a, what do you call, individual autonomy, assuring the individual autonomy of everyone in this class and all that, right? And what I do is, in the end, what I do is I get you all to work and I'm making money out of it. Okay, so I have sort of tricked you into thinking that you have a space, but in reality, what's happening is that you all are coming into my factory and you all are working and I'm making money. And at one point, if you all feel like, okay, you know what, although sir is telling us we have our rights, that's not how it works. We aren't really receiving rights and we should like retaliate against this. Then I quickly take on. I'll be like, okay, no, wait. I am superior. You all better work. If not, I am going to execute you. Right? In Sinhala you say issala oluwata gala වැඩේ කරගන්න ඊට පස්සේ ටොක් කරනලා වැඩේ කරගන්නවා කියලා, right? First, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pat on your head and be like, okay, you all have rights, don't worry, like, you all are respected and all that. Please do the work so I can make money. Then if that doesn't work, I come and I will slap you and be like, you do the work, or else you will see that how dangerous I am. Right? I threaten you, I get your work. So that's what they say. Liberal state tries to sort of like butter you up and make you believe you have rights and get their work done. When that doesn't work, it turns into a fascist country and they come and they threaten you and get the work done. So they believe when liberalism fails to keep the capitalist system going, right? When capitalism decays, when it gets rotten, it turns into a fascist system. That's what Mr. Herbert Marcuse believed. Okay. All right. Tarushi, please read Fascism for us. Tarushi, I can see your mic unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Sir, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
Fascism. Fascism was initiated as a political ideology with the political movement against liberalism and socialism in comparison with liberalism and socialism. Fascism is mostly a recent political ideology. Liberalism was originated in the 17th and 18th centuries. Socialism was initiated in the late 19th century, while fascism was originated in the early 20th century. The ideology of fascism ideally supports an autocratic dictatorship rule, although it should be noted that fascism is not exactly a synonym for dictatorship, since as an ideology, fascism has its own unique features. The term fascist is an Italian term which refers to unity. The Italian dictator Benito Mussolini is considered as the father of fascism. The term fascist was later referred to identify the autocratic political system and dominating state system in Germany and Japan. The background behind the concept of fascism. Mussolini and his followers founded an organization in 1915 under the name Fascio to promote fascism. These organizations did take part in the Italian parliament elections, yet did not manage to win a seat in the Italian parliament. However, following the World War, Italy suffered from post-war economic struggles, which led the liberal government to lose its popularity. Following this, Mussolini and the fascist ideology gained mainstream popularity in Italy. Since fascists promoted a united, independent, and a strong Italy, the Italian public embraced fascism over liberalism and socialism. After 1922, Mussolini and his followers started getting political dominance in Italy, and by 1926, the entire Italian political system was in the hands of Mussolini. The Nazism in Germany is also another fascist system, which was unique to Germany. This was created by Adolf Hitler. Similar to Italy, Germany was also struggling after the First World War, which created a similar political and social background for Nazism to be born. In practical application, Nazism and fascism were more similar. Hence, in political science, Nazi Germany is considered as an ideal example for fascism. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi political party managed to gain responsible political power by 1930s. In 1934, following the death of President Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler centralized all his power in the position of the chancellor and became the supreme leader of Germany. Following the Italian and German fascist systems, served countries in the world also embraced fascist systems. All these countries seem to have common reasons behind the origin of fascist government, as well as the fascist rule itself in different countries seem to have different similarities. Fascism as an ideology. Out of all the political ideologies, liberalism, socialism, and fascism can be considered as three mainstream and important ideologies. When we analyze the theoretical structure of these ideologies, it can be identified that liberalism is centralized around the individual, socialism is centralized around the society, while fascism is centralized around the state. This means that fascism is a political ideology that prioritizes the greatness of the state about the individual and the society. In other words, the betterment of the individual and the betterment of the society should be comprised in order to assure the betterment of the state. Main features of a fascist system are as follows. Number one, totalitarianism. A fascist system features an autocracy, which means that all the political power is centralized with the ruler. The leader of the fascist nation has the absolute control over the citizens politically as well as socially. This system is known as totalitarianism. Number two, cult of the leader. Fascism is an ideology which is centralized around the state. Therefore, fascism features the absolute dominance of the state and the unconditional surrender of the citizens to the state. Therefore, according to Mussolini, the state is a figure which should be worshipped by the citizens. This is known as a number three, cult of the leader. Similar to the state being worshipped, fascism also features worshipping the leader. The leader of the fascist system is considered as a divine figure among average humans. Therefore, citizens are expected to follow and worship their leader unconditionally. Fascist governments intentionally promote propaganda to create a divine image of the leader. In Germany, Hitler was promoted as a divine figure. The term Führer, the supreme leader, to refer to their leader. Similarly, the greatness of Hitler was vastly promoted in media and education. This feature can be seen mainly in other fascist countries as well as democratic countries with the threat of fascism. Number four, extreme racism. In addition to promoting the supremacy of the state, fascism also promotes the supremacy of the race. During the period of Nazi Germany, the German fascists believed that the Germans to be pure Aryan race. This idea of racism justified the mass Jew execution and German invasions over other countries. Number five, extreme militarism. In simple terms, fascist governments love war, as fascists believe the only mechanism to solve issues between states is going to war. Therefore, fascism also features an invasive foreign policy. According to fascists, peace is a dream of cowards and proper policy should be blood and iron. Fascists also points out that people inherit war similar to women inherit motherhood. The German fascists believe that the pure Germans should invade other countries and create a German empire, while other impure ethnicities should be executed from Germany. Number 6, the use of violence and terror as a political weapon. Unlike democratic liberal systems, fascist systems use violence and terror to assure political dominance. This means that a fascist government would use violence and terror to control any political rival group. Even among the citizens, criticizing or disobeying the government is handled with violence and terror. In Germany, the Nazi Party ran violence and terror against all rival political groups as well as the Jewish ethnicity. All these activities were done under the state protection as fascism approved political violence and terror. Number 7, lack of rights and liberty. Fascism clearly rejects the concept of rights and liberty for citizens. Rights and liberty are openly compromised in order to assure the greatness of the state. The interpretation of on fascist by the Neo-Marxists. In 1930s, the Neo-Marxists criticized fascism as they identified fascism as a capitalism in decay. Mainly the teachings of Herbert Marcuse can be considered as important in this regard. According to this interpretation, fascism is created when liberalism fails to maintain the capitalistic system. In other words, fascism is capitalism in decay.
Right, okay. So we shall take a moment and make a small short note, 5 minutes, okay? Then we'll move on to our next ideology. Right, okay, let's proceed. I am asked two questions. Let's ask those questions and start. Uh, so you said a difference between totalitarianism and dictatorship. Can you tell that again, please? Totalitarianism and dictatorship. Okay, first of all, it's a little difficult to draw a line and divide those two. But the definition is dictatorship is a power centralized government with one person on top, where totalitarianism is a power centralized government with a group on top, right? So when you have the entire government power centralized, being centralized around one person, it's a dictatorship. When the power is centralized around a group, it's a totalitarianism government. Now it's a little difficult because, you know, even when you take one person like Hitler, Hitler was not alone running the country, right? So you can't necessarily say that's a dictatorship because Hitler had his Nazi party. So you can say it's a totalitarianism. But even when you have a team, like a group running an autocratic government, still that the group has a leader, right? So it's very difficult to draw a line and say this is a totalitarian government, this is a dictatorship. But the definition is totalitarianism is like power centralized around a group, dictatorship is power centralized around a person. Another question. So just wondering, did Hitler's bloodline continue after his? Well, I haven't really read about this in detail, but I've come across a couple of articles. In fact, I've seen that Hitler's relatives weren't allowed to have children. I saw that like the government, German government that came after that, they decided to cut Hitler's bloodline off. And I read that Hitler's relatives weren't allowed to make children. But some say that there were distant relatives who had children, and up to date, there are some people who's like around 8% who share like Hitler's DNA around 8%. Say that. Okay, right. Now moving on to our next ideology, social democracy. Okay, so what's happening in social democracy? We studied liberalism and we studied socialism. So this is basically like a combination of the two, right? So liberalism is a good ideology, right? Isn't it? Liberalism is a good ideology. What is wrong with liberalism? Liberalism talks about making sure that people receive their liberties. Socialism is also good. Socialism is about making the society a fair place, right? So is there a way for us to achieve both of these? Now, liberalism also has weaknesses, flaws. What are the flaws? The main flaw of liberalism is that unfairness it creates, like the rich people making a lot of profit under that, right? Same goes for socialism. Socialism also has some weaknesses. Mainly the lack of rights, lack of liberties. People don't have the political liberty and all that because in a socialist country, you don't have like multi-party elections and all that, right? So a couple of political scientists thought in Germany and like Scandinavian countries, they were thinking, okay, you know what? What if we create a way to protect all the good parts of liberalism and protect all the good parts of socialism and then put it together in order to avoid all the flaws of liberalism and socialism. Hence came social democracy, right? Which means that what they do is they take out the positive features of liberal democracy and they take out the good features of socialism as well, which is why that you have social from socialism, democracy from liberal democracy, and it creates social democracy. So basically what happens here is that you have certain elements like universal franchise, multi-party elections, constitutionalism, rule of law, representative governance, right, rights of citizens, all those things are there. Okay. Meanwhile, instead of like letting capitalism to completely take over, they make sure that the socialist ideology of like making sure that everyone's equal in terms of economic affairs, those things are also applied up to a certain extent, right? So you put a mild version of socialism while having liberal democratic features. Okay. So have you all heard Have you all heard of the whole story that Sri Lanka turned into a socialist country in 1970 to 1977 under Sirimao's government in United Front government? That is wrong. Sri Lanka didn't turn into a socialist country. If we turn into a socialist country, we wouldn't be having multi-party elections. What we turned into was a social democratic country, which means we still followed the democratic format. We still had elections and constitutionalism and all those democratic features were there. In fact, that we applied a mild version of socialism, which means that what we followed was social democracy. Okay. So when it comes to this, the most important thing that you need to do is remembering the names. Okay. Who is the most important person? This is German political scientist Edward Bernstein. Right. Edward Bernstein was the one who created the pioneer of this social democratic ideology. Right. You have to remember his name, how he was not himself a Marxist, but he did agree with some of the ideas of Karl Marx. He agreed with Karl Marx's idea of like making the society a fair place, but he didn't really agree with the idea of an armed revolution. Okay. Then, of course, Ferdinand Lassalle, there was another person who supported this ideology later on. So these Edward Bernstein and Ferdinand Lassalle. Okay. And by like 1930, we saw that the whole idea of modern liberalism coming out. Modern liberalism is also keeping the liberal democratic features and the state doing some welfare activities. So modern liberalism and welfare state sounds very similar to social democracy as well. Okay. Then you have the basic features of social democracy, how they reject capitalism because it creates unfairness, inequality, and all that. And how they also reject the whole revolutionary idea of socialism and Marxism about like doing an armed revolution and taking the state instrument to their hand, whatever, right? And how they take the good parts of liberalism and socialism both, right? How they control the market up to a certain extent, and at the same time, how they allow all democratic features, okay? Then we need to sort of understand what is the difference between Marxism and social democracy, right? So we need to understand where they make the whole differences, right? Then I have left some space here for you all to draw a, if you all want, like draw a small short note, you can put it here itself. A small short note about social democracy, what you need to remember. Okay, right. So once those main three, liberalism, socialism, and fascism are over, as you can see, these other ideologies are quite straightforward and they are reasonably quite simple. Okay, can we get someone to read? Shastra, can you read?
Yes, sir. Social democracy. Social democracy was developed as a political ideology by the 19th century. The German social democratic parties, which were developed in 1860s, can be considered as the origin of the ideology. Following this, in many European countries, social democratic parties were developed, which were initially organized as workers' unions. Following the Second World War, social democratic movements were further developed in Germany and Scandinavian countries. Social democracy can basically be defined as an ideology which continues the positive features of liberal democracy and the positive features of socialism. As an ideology, social democracy appreciates the positive features of liberal democracy, such as universal franchise, constitutionalism, rule of law, representative governance, comparative political party system, and rights of citizens. However, social democracy prefers socialist principles for economic management instead of capitalist principles. Especially, social democracy allows the state to handle more economic representatives in order to minimize the class division. Social democracy was developed through democratic reforms which were introduced Marxism. Therefore, it can be identified as a reform of Marxism. Instead of the original idea of the social revolution in Marxism, social democracy attempts to create a moderate social ideology. Therefore, this is known as German Revolution. The most important political thinker in terms of social democracy is the German political scientist Edward Bernstein. Also, it should be noted that several political thinkers such as, so can you scroll down a bit? such as Ferdinand Lassalle have also created a foundation for this ideology. Also, Edward Bernstein himself is a Marxist. He does not agree with the idea of Karl Marx in terms of developing the socialist system. Karl Marx pointed out that the capitalist system may fall at one point as a result of resistance by the working class. Bernstein disagrees with this idea as he believes the socialist goals of the working class can be achieved by parliament democracy. Since this system follows parliament democracy with certain features of socialist economic, the social democracy is reasonable parallel to modern liberal welfare state. As a result, social democracy and welfare state had a political connection in 1930. Therefore, social democracy was considered as another stream of socialism. The basic features of social democracy are as follows. Rejecting capitalism since capitalism creates an economic inequality and social democracy. Rejecting the revolutionary socialism suggested by Marxism. Socialism is subjected as a solution for social issues created by capitalism and classic liberalism. This ideology of socialism is developed into scientific socialism by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This ideology of socialism was suggested as a social revolution and a solution against capitalism. However, social democracy does not agree with this idea and mostly believe in democratic mechanism. Although Marxists believe that the entire society is based on the element of economics, the social democracy does not agree with that. According to Marx, everything in the superstructure of the society is based on the internal structure within the economic base. Therefore, Marx points out that all these institutes support the necessities of the economically powerful class. Bernstein does not agree with this idea. According to Bernstein, the economical factor is in fact important, yet not the solitary decisive factor. Bernstein believes that problems that are created by socialism require solutions by reforming capitalism on socialist principles. Bernstein suggests the following steps as practical solutions for these problems. The state intervention in the economic sector, establishing a mixed economy with capitalist and socialist principles, social welfare services, redistributing the revenue and the capital, collective negotiation of the working class. The difference between Marxism and social democracy. The capitalistic system does not face a complete collapse as expected by Karl Marx. Political parties do not follow strategies with the assumption of the future of the capitalist system. The social system has not evolved to a level to cause friction between social classes. The number of rich individuals increase in the society. The labor exploitation done by the rich class is reasonably restrained by modern day movements. Under proper democratic system, revolutionary transformations are not necessary. In conclusion, the social democratic theory developed by Edward Bernstein provides that in order to achieve the motive of suffering successfully, it is necessary to work towards a socialist society through necessary reforms rather than waiting for the entire capitalist system to collapse.
Right, okay. So again, as you guys know, you all know the drill, right? Take 8 minutes till 5:35. Make a short note of social democracy. Then we can move on to one more ideology for today. So let's take a look at another ideology. This time, nationalism. Let's take a look at nationalism. All right. So the idea, the history of nationalism runs all the way to the 16th century. Okay. Because you guys know what happened in the 16th century, the Westphalia Convention happened, and this whole idea of a national state idea was formed with the modern territorial state, right? So with that, the idea of nationalism came, belonging to a country, and that being your nation, and you having a connection to that, right? Now, if I ask you a question, if you see the Sri Lankan cricket team playing a cricket match with another country, right? Why do you feel like supporting the Sri Lankan team? And why don't you all feel the same way when is it because you live in the same territory as those people? Why doesn't it work the same way when the Western province is playing cricket match with the Southern province or whatever? Right now, when the Lanka Premier League was going on, LPL was going on, I was supporting the Jaffna Stallions. My favorite team was the Jaffna team, although like I'm from Colombo. The team Colombo Kings, I didn't support them. I support the Jaffna team. I didn't feel like supporting the Colombo team. But when the World Cup is going on, when yesterday Sri Lanka was playing South Africa, I was supporting Sri Lanka. And I had more intensity supporting the Sri Lankan team. Why is that? It's because I have an emotional connection with the nation that I'm a part of, which is common for all of us, right? So this whole term of being a nation and people being connected to their nation in terms of the identity started being formed as an ideology in the 16th century, especially after the Westphalia Convention, and once the format of the state was formed, right? In Greek times, there was no such thing called countries, because each city was a state, right? During the Roman times, medieval times, countries weren't in existence, which is why nationalism didn't really have it at that time. Okay. So the modern nation state or the modern territorial state is based on this idea of nationalism. Okay, so basically nationalism means, like we have given a definition here, a population comprised of different ethnicities yet live within the territory of a state being considered as a nation within a common identity. So we have different ethnicities living here, right? We are the Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims, everyone, but we belong to one nation. And that's the ideology we are trying to promote. We are trying to minimize the issues between the ethnicities, tension between the ethnicities, by promoting the idea of the common identity of a nation, that all of us being belong to the same nation, right? So the conceptual bond which is required for a population of a state is provided by nationalism. So this is one of the most important concepts, especially in the modern context of politics. As you can see, this idea of nationalism is there in fascism also, right? Because they promote state so much. Even in liberalism, it is there up to a certain extent. Okay. So when it comes to international politics, as we learned in unit 14, it is a coordination process between different states. So every state has a national identity, and which is why that each country has national desires, which they pursue with their national power. We saw what decides a country to have more power, or like what sort of decides. We saw all of that in unit 14. Okay. So when it comes to nationalism, that we have to keep in mind that it has two unique features, right? First of all, it is not an organized or unified theory. Okay, it is not like liberalism or socialism, not even like fascism. It doesn't have unique features like state being superior, pursuing political independency, or protecting fairness, or assuring the individual autonomy, or emphasizing human rights or whatever, right? So we saw there are features in each one of those theories we studied before. But nationalism is not an ideology like that. It is like an abstract ideology compared to the other ones we studied, right? And unlike other ideologies, nationalism did not receive just contradictions, but it should be contributions. There's a typo here. Contributions from major. Sorry. right? Contributions from major philosophers, although it has received contribution from similar political societies, right? So this means that we saw big names in each one of those, like liberalism nang John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Montesquieu. Socialism nang is Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels. Before that, like in utopian socialism, there are other names. And then fascism, you had Hitler, Mussolini, then Edward Bernstein in social democracy. But nationalism, you don't find names like that. You don't have people contributing, big names contributing. But it has received contributions from political societies. Okay. So based on these features, we can see that there are three theoretical approaches to the study of nationalism. You have the Modernist Approach, Primordial Approach, and Instrumentalist Approach. Okay. So what is the Modernist Approach? Now, according to this approach, nationalism is a concept that has a long history. It goes up to thousands of years back to the beginning of beginning of human civilization, right? It should be 1,000 in words. Okay, right. So this approach explains that the idea of nationalism existed since humans existed on Earth. They say that it just, it was nationalism, but it wasn't nationalism based on a country like we have today, right? In Greek era, people were loyal to their city-state. Roman era, people were loyal to their empire. Feudalist era, they were loyal to whoever the regional ruler they had. So people have always been loyal to whatever the state that they were a part of, right? So they say that this was there since the beginning of human civilization. It didn't just start with in the modern times, like we discuss in the Westphalia Convention. So this was basically mentioned by Ernest Geller and Benedict Anderson, right? Then you have the Primordial Approach. This approach basically talks about like nationalism with regard to a certain historical interpretation, right? Now, for example, the Indian Prime Minister talks about how nationalism with the historical point of view, with a connection to the contemporary world. Okay. Also, the idea of nation of Pakistan, that they have a historical connection with the religion of Islam. Okay, why Pakistan wanted to be a nation? Why did Pakistan want to be a part of India? Because India is a Hindu majority country, and with the religious legacy of Islam, they were with the spread that you had in the Middle East and the South Asian region, with Islam coming up, right? So they wanted to separate from India and form an Islamic republic. So that shows that the nationhood there, like the nationality, comes with a historical background. Okay. Even in Sri Lanka, the whole idea of like the LTT claiming a separate nation for the Tamils is because of the idea that historical claims that they are making, that northern and eastern provinces have always been a kingdom of Tamils since then. So they don't want to be a part of this one nation called Sri Lanka because they believe that them to be a separate nation anyway, right? So the primordial approach is the whole idea of nations being connected to the historical factors, okay? However, this has been criticized heavily because, as you can see, pretty much most of the examples you can come across this have resulted in civil wars and conflicts and creating divisions within the nation states. Then you have the instrumentalistic approach. Instrumentalist approach. With the name going as instrument, I think you can obviously guess where this is going. Who came up with this? It was Karl Marx. Karl Marx was the one who came up with the instrumental approach, and surprise, surprise, Karl Marx said that nationalism is a trick played by the rich people to suppress the poor people. How did he explain that? He said that state is, according to him, state is an instrument used by the rich people, right, to gain power and suppress the poor people and to make more profit. So nationalism is the idea of loving your state, being fond of your state. So there's a trick played by the rich people to sort of like love the very same instrument that suppresses you. It's like saying that imagine that someone has a cane and that person uses that cane to beat you up and get the work done, and you have bonded with that cane. You love that cane. You are willing to die for that cane. It's something like that. If you are willing to die for Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is a state that is suppressing you, squeezing your labor out, exploiting you so that rich people can make money. And you are willing to die for that very instrument that's sort of like suppressing you. So Karl Marx said nationalism is a concept created by the rich people to suppress, to trick the poor people into loving what suppresses them, the very thing that suppresses them. All right. So we can see that in practical politics, the application of nationality happens as an instrument. Like, not that Karl Marx is entirely wrong, that you see nationalism is often used to obtain votes. How many times do you see politicians coming up and saying, you know, vote us to save this nation? Right? Practically, when Mahinda Rajapaksa, when Mahinda Rajapaksa's government was like going haywire, Maithripala came and said, vote to me, I'll save this nation. And people voted to him and made him the president. Then he was like going haywire. Then Gotabaya came and said, okay, give me the votes, give me this government, I'll save this country. Right? And now he's going haywire. Whoever comes next, he will also say, give him votes, give him the government, and he'll save the nation. So nationalism is often used to obtain votes in elections as a slogan, right? And also to enroll new members, right? To enroll new members, especially like if you want to enroll members to a political party, saying we are the political party that's there to defend this nation, to enroll members to the army, or to enroll members to organizations. The LTT obtained enroll new members to LTT by saying, okay, we are going to win a nation for Tamil people, come and join us, right? So you use nationalism as an instrument to get new people enrolled in the name of the nation, and also to secure vote bases of certain leaders, like especially like leaders like the Rajapakshas in Sri Lanka, Narendra Modi in India, right? Donald Trump and the Republicans in the USA. These leaders have nationalism as their vote base. People identify them as like the saviors of their nations, and people end up voting for these people, right? So it is used as an instrument, so it is understandable, okay? So we can see that nationalism has sort of turned into a political ideology, okay? And however, we can see that as an ideology, when we take the basic idea of nationalism, that we can see it sort of comes into contact with these kind of concepts like political independence, regional autonomy, equality, group rights, formation of nation states. These kind of like subdivisions of nationalism are quite common for us to find, right? However, the most important thing is nowadays, nationalism seems to have like, it has evolved into two major stages. One is the national state nationalism, other one is the ethnic nationalism. Okay. Now, the whole idea of nationalism solely depended on nation state nationalism at that time. Okay. Sri Lanka. What is your nationality? Sri Lanka. But currently, like there's an ethnic nationality coming up, which means that a group of ethnicity considering themselves as a nationality, right? So although that our nation is Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese have a nationality, Sinhalese nationalism. Tamils have a nationality, Tamil nationalism. Muslims have a nationality, Muslim nationalism. So this is what is normally used as the political instrument most of the times, right? So rather than mentioning that Sri Lanka, like people coming into power to, people being presidents to save Sri Lanka, mostly what they are looking at is like most of the times what is normally promoted in political arena is to protect your ethnic nationality, right? The Rajapakshas are normally voted by people not necessarily to protect Sri Lanka, but mostly to protect the Sinhala nationalism, right? Hardcore Sinhala nationalists are the ones who vote for them. Same goes to ethnic-based parties like Tamil National Alliance or the Muslim Congress. They are voted by people who believe in the nationalism, people who are concerned about the nationalism of their own ethnicity. Okay, so we can see that although we feel like nationalism is a concept that unites people inside a nation state, it can sometimes divide the people as well. It depends on what sort of a nationalism you have happening in your state, right? Are you promoting national state nationalism in your country, or are you promoting ethnic nationalism in your country? Depends on that. People may get united, people may get divided. Okay, right. So when it comes to the national state nationalism, right, this happens quite often. This is not a problem if your country is not very diverse, because the national state nationalism and the ethnic nationalism is the same in your country. For example, France. People in France are French, but now of course it has changed a little because they have immigrants, a lot of immigrants, African immigrants and Asian immigrants coming up, right? But France is a country that doesn't follow federalism or anything, because they are mostly ethnically, they are homogeneous. They only have like one ethnicity. Okay, so in that case, your national state nationalism and the ethnic nationalism is the same. Okay, so what is difficult is when the ethnic nationality differs in your country. Like for example, in Sri Lanka, when you have three different streams of ethnic nationalism: Sinhala nationalism, Tamil nationalism, and Muslim nationalism, right? And when that happens, it is very difficult to keep up, because sometimes your national state, nation state nationalism doesn't really tally with that. Then it's very difficult, because most of the times when you are trying to create an identity for Sri Lanka, most of the times people expect that to be like solely like Sinhalese people expect that to be purely Sinhala identity, right? Or sometimes minorities could expect like an unfair way of division. I'll give you an example. Think about the Sri Lankan flag. Now, I always praise the Sri Lankan flag. I think it's ideal. Sri Lankan flag is ideal. Why? Because it represents all the ethnicities and it matches the ratios, right? It has the lion and it has the bow leaves to represent, okay, 70% Buddhist, right? And it hasn't forgotten, like it has the yellow color and everything, red color and everything. So to represent all the Sinhalese, 70% of the population. And then you have a 30% of minorities who aren't forgotten, because like around 30% of the flag is dedicated for the Muslims and the Tamils and the other minorities, right? So that is ideal. But the problem is that you have the Sinhala nationalists who are sort of like trying to get rid of these strips and turn the country only into a lion's flag. And you have some Tamil and Muslim nationalists who believe that no, the lion should go out, and like you should have like equal sizes of a cross and that Islam logo and all that. Like you see the 4 bow leaves around the lion. Like some people say, okay, you should get rid of that. You should have 1 bow leaf, 1 cross, 1 that Om mark of Hinduism, and 1 Islam, that star and the moon, right? So I feel like both these requests, both these claims are like unreasonable. It is unreasonable for us to expect the entire flag to be just the lion and the bow leaves. Neither you can't expect like all 4 religions to have equal spaces, because that's not how it works. This is not an entirely Sinhala Buddhist country. Neither this is like a country where you have every ethnicity in equal numbers. It's a country where you have 70% Sinhalese and around like 15 to 18% Tamils and like around 7 to 9% Muslims. Okay, so it should match that, right? So I believe we have a good flag. But sometimes countries can sort of like have difficulties with that. So that's when the ethnicity doesn't really match, ethnic nationalism doesn't tally with the national state nationalism you have, which is when your country gets into conflicts. Okay, right. Then we can see outcomes of nationalism, but mostly outcomes of nationalism have sort of been quite negative, right? There are positives also, like especially like uniting countries, that has been happening, but inside countries, you have been having like extreme separatist movements, and all that, which has led to a lot of destructive wars. Okay, right. So let's read this part, and we shall be done with nationalism as well. Right, Sarah, can you read?
Nationalism. The history of nationalism runs all the way to the 16th century. Although the initial concept was originated in the 16th century, nationalism went through a standard theoretical integration during the 18th and 19th centuries. In addition to being an ideology, nationalism can also be identified as a social movement. Nationalism is the main concept which provides the foundation for the modern day nation state format. The current context of the state is based on the concept of a solitary nation lives within a nation state. It also means that each nation is a state. Therefore, the concept of nationalism has equalized state and nation. In simple terms, nationalism means a population comprised of different ethnicities yet lived within the territory of the state being considered as a nation with a common identity. Therefore, the conceptual common bond which is required for the population of a state is provided by nationalism. The concept of nationalism can be considered as one of the most important concepts with regard to the modern context of politics. In addition to finding modern-day format of the national state, nationalism also has reshaped international politics, including interstate relationship and interstate conflicts. Most of the large-scale wars in the contemporary world, including the two world wars, have taken part with regard to nationalism. Therefore, it can be seen that the concept of nationalism is extremely influential in modern-day human politics. As a political ideology and a stream of concept, there are two unique features in the concept of nationalism. Nationalism is not an organized or unified theory. Unlike other ideologies, nationalism did not receive contributions from major philosophers, although it has received contributions from similar political societies. Nationalism is also the idea of belonging to a nation and the loyalty citizens have towards their nation. Also, it should be noted that nationalism guides political communities into a self-conscious nation. There are three theoretical approaches to the study of nationalism: Modernist Approach, Primordial Approach, and Instrumentalist Approach. Modernist Approach. According to the approach, nationalism is a concept which has a long history of several thousand years, which runs all the way to the beginning of human civilization. This approach explains that the history of nation is old as much as the human history itself. Pioneers of this approach are Ernest Gellner and Benedict Anderson. Primordial approach. The practical application of the primordial approach is basically establishing the idea of nationalism with regard to a certain community through the historical interpretation. The following practical examples explain the application of the primordial approach. The Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru published the book The Discovery of India in 1949, which defines the Indian nation from a historical point of view with a connection to the contemporary world. The nation of Pakistan has been defined from a historical point of view with connection to the religion of Islam being spread in the Middle East and South Asian region. With this approach, the term of separating Pakistan from India in the modern context is supported. In Sri Lanka, also the historical integration is provided to support the existence of the Sinhala nation and the Tamil nation separately. The primordial approach has been criticized for prioritizing ethnicity of the nation state and bringing divisions within the nation states. The instrumentalist approach. This is the approach provided by the Marxists to define nationalism. According to this approach, the nation is an instrument used by the rich class to gain power. The basic idea behind this approach is that nationalism is a trick played by the rich class to exploit the lower layers of the society. In practical politics, the application of this approach can be seen quite evidently. In fact, in practical politics, nationalism can be seen as one of the main decisive factors behind power transformation. Nationalism is used as an instrument to obtain votes, to enroll new members, to secure vote bases of certain leaders, etc. By using the concept of nationalism in multi-ethnic societies, in this process, the idea of racial supremacy is combined with nationalism as a political strategy. This has been heavily criticized for late, resulting in racism and ethnic tension. This has become a very common scenario in politics as recent elections in USA, UK, India, Sri Lanka, and etc. had a massive influence of nationalism. Basic idea of nation and nationalism. Nationalism is an ideology which provides a collective identity to a community which thinks as a nation. Therefore, nationalism is a common feeling which combines the members of a nation together. It affirms the feeling of belonging to a political community under the name nation. In order to think as solitary nation, members in that group should share a common bond. This is known as the national identity. Elements such as language, culture, religion, history, territoriality, and etc. can be considered as the main contributing factor behind the national identity. Nationalism, which begins with the above-mentioned common identity, later evolved into a deeper ideology by acquiring a political character. In this stage, as an ideology, nationalism becomes a force which shapes the collective political consciousness of society and mobilizes the community's political actions in order to pursue political goals such as political independence, regional autonomy, equality, group rights, formation of nation states, and etc. The right of a nation to self-determination can be considered as another extremely important concept which has ties with nationalism. This refers to the basic idea of each nation having the right to decide its own political fate and political future. However, this idea is considered controversial since it supports the power of a region to establish a new state by breaking away from the existing state. Therefore, the range of this right has a vast capacity, which even includes independent and regional autonomy. National most fulfills the key function of providing a criteria to distinguish one nation from another. These distinguishers are identified by elements such as language, culture, religion, and etc. However, when these differences get into extreme level, it can result in rival attitudes among nations. Evolution of nationalism. As an ideology, nationalism as well as the political movement attached to nationalism seem to have gradually evolved over the centuries. In fact, it can be noted that the evolution of nationalism has two major stages national state nationalism and ethnic nationalism. National state nationalism. This is considered as the classical form of nationalism. It is based on the idea of each nation state being considered as a nation. In other words, it supported the idea members living within the territory of the state to be considered as the members of a solitary nation. Example, the passport of Sri Lankan citizens provides the nationality of a person as a Sri Lankan. This is basically considering all Sri Lankan citizens as members of the same nation. The conceptual origin of the idea can be found in the 18th century where several European countries became nation states through revolution. Most importantly, 1789, the French Revolution promoted the idea of nationalism with sovereignty. This included a politically organized territorial state being considered as a nation. This is eventually developed in Europe and later embraced by other regions on the world with European colonization. According, these nations are characterized as Sri Lankan nation, Indian nation, American nation, etc. Ethnic nationalism. This can be considered as a political conscience of a group of people with certain ethnic identity. Since within a nation state many ethnic groups exist, these communities tend to develop a version of nationalism of their own based on their cultural, religious, or racial identity. A nation state has many different ethnic groups living within their territory. Example, the nation state of Sri Lanka has a collection of citizens who share the nation state nationalism. However, within Sri Lanka itself, several ethnic groups exist as Sinhala, Tamil, and Muslim. Once these communities start thinking as a political community with that ethnic identity is known as ethnic nationalism. This nationalism is based on elements such as language, religion, culture, and etc. This ethnic nationalism is most expressed through ethnic friction in the society when minority groups face discrimination, inequality, and injustices within the nation state, and eventually driven to think with their ethnic identities. Ethnic identity is mostly attached with political goals and political requests made by minority groups. These include equal rights, regional autonomy, federalism, language and cultural rights, at times separation as a new state. Ethnic nationalism is a much more recent concept in comparison with nation-state nationalism. This mostly came into existence in 1980 with the development of minority group political movements in many nation states. Outcomes of nationalism. As a whole, the ideology of nationalism has existed since the 18th century. When we analyze the historical experience of nationalism, it can be seen that both negative and positive students attracted to nationalism. The nation-state system, which is functioning in the modern world, is primarily based on the ideology of nationalism. Nationalism has introduced the idea of achieving political emancipation through national independence, which is an important element in modern political consciousness. However, throughout the last few centuries, the extreme forms of nationalism have driven nations and communities into war.
Right, okay. So again, take few minutes, make a good short note of nationalism as well.